One of the things that made me most pleased was when we came in here and the Sheikh said, could you see this as a prayer space? Yes. But obviously we'd need to ditch this mezzanine floor. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's my line. I can think of nothing that would improve this space more than removing that. In spite of the fact that we really ideally want a first floor gallery, that there was never any question of keeping this mezzanine floor, was how I first knew I was going to enjoy this.
Alhamdulillah, fadlullah wasi' rahim, ya man li'abdihi idha nada sari'an yujib.
Well, my name is Warwick Pethers, and I'm here because I've made something of a speciality about work in the Gothic idiom. Other people were doing classical architecture, and it's never for some reason appealed to me to the same extent. There's something visceral and authentic and vigorous and lifelike about Gothic. So I was very clear that it was the Gothic that I wanted to learn about.
My name is Anthony Milroy. My background starts around here, really, in the Yorkshire Hills. My father looked after, as a factor and as land agent, estates very similar to this, and large farming practices in the West and North Riding. And I moved to Scotland and a degree in agriculture and natural sciences and master's degree. Set me up to go to Yemen. I was supposed to be an expert in agriculture, and I lived in Yemen for 4 years and actually learnt that they were the experts. They had been at traditional husbandry for maybe 6,000 years, and I learned most of what I know at my work. I continue to go to Yemen backwards and forwards for the next 3 decades, and I have been documenting all these principles and practices of what you could call traditional husbandry, which was disseminated across the Caliphate. Syrians and Yemenis had great know-how in farming, and they took it across, and Granada, certainly by the time they were established in Granada.
Back in 1986, I went and heard Stephen Dykes lecture, and although pretty much everything he said in that lecture would have been considered heresy in either of my schools of architecture, by that time I was ready to feel that sounded like good common sense to me. And I wrote him a letter, and one way or another I worked with him for the last 8 years of his life. For much of his career he'd been very much in the mainstream, and was entrusted with 2 buildings, perhaps the most prominent buildings in the cultural life of the country. So he won a competition to design what's known as the Baldacchino in St. Paul's Cathedral. And Dykes Bauer's idea was to design something that looked like it had been designed by Christopher Wren, who of course designed the rest of the building. Now, in the Gothic idiom, the other building where he did a lot of work was Westminster Abbey. He was surveyor of the fabric there for 20 years after the war and began the restoration. And if you look at photographs, the whole thing has a sort of brown tinge, which looks actually pleasantly antique in some ways. But that was as a result of the gas lighting and the oil lighting and the candle lighting over and the pollution of 19th century London. And Dykes Bauer had always been rather disappointed by this. So when he was made surveyor of the fabric, he made it his business to make the thing a more fitting venue. And so he began by cleaning the thing and then applying medieval decoration, often where it had never been applied before. And again, there's a tremendous richness to that building, particularly on state occasions. So he's a great figure in the life of this country in the form of its history as we all experience it. I'm lucky enough to have been invited here to look at this building from the point of view of converting it into a mosque. It was built by Congregationalists back in the 1870s as a theological college. They wanted to have a high status, proper education here, and I think they wanted to build something that was perhaps reminiscent of an Oxford or a Cambridge college. This would have cost a fortune to make from new in today's terms. You know, we've been so lucky to get this building with all this fantastic work which we can use immediately. What we're looking at the moment in this area is a paradise garden, so that it's the last external space you pass through before passing into the mosque. Being Gothic, I'm obviously seeing that in the manner of a cloister garth.
And here we are, we've got this amazing, these two great assets of what we've inherited with Heaton Mount. The first massive asset we're blessed with is the Grade 2 listed building. This is a great building, a great Victorian Gothic building. The second great asset, that it's situated in this beautiful landscape, and it's a mount, so it's got depth and height, and a mount has traditionally been a tenemos, a spiritual place of pilgrimage. And as you arrive at the top of this mount, you have this magnificent frontage, and we're blessed with the fact that the space around it is the exact place in this 16 acres where you would choose to make your most precious garden, a paradise garden. And the great tradition of English 19th century gardens around the time this building was put up was this sense of enclosure in the space. And we have this tradition in the vernacular tradition in Christianity of the cloistered garden.
Whereas there is a whole argument in favour of Gothic being the natural choice for Muslim architecture in England. It was an idea I first heard from Abdul Wahed El-Wakil, the great mosque builder, and over the years he and I have always got on terribly well. And it has gradually emerged that these two architectures have a lot in common. But it was his suggestion, as far as I'm aware originally, that if historical precedent was to be followed of what happened when Islam went to North Africa or Andalusia or China or India, it was to the local architecture that they turned. They're all hugely different from each other and emerge very naturally from the local high architecture, so that they're at one with their climate and their landscape and their history. And Al-Wakil's view is that in England that would be Gothic. Well, we're now in the space which we hope one day will become the prayer hall itself. And if you can imagine this building without this floor, it was a really impressive space here. We've got this fantastic panelled hammer beam roof, tremendous arched, I suppose you'd say panelled and barrel bolted openings into it. I'm not quite sure where the colours came from, but I mean, just a fantastic space. Huge south-facing window there, great richness, height, but not too lofty.
This feature, aligned with the main entrance, gives us the basic symmetry and layout, and the fountain, the 4 rivers of life, will fill in the detail to give seclusion and privacy as you walk around the garden. It won't be just one big open space. So you look at the fine frontage, or you look from the mosque out to the garden, and they will be aligned.
So we're now in the main staircase of the building, which is very architecturally characteristic. The columns behind me are cast iron, which marks them out very much as Victorian and possibly even part of the industrial North Victorian. And then the really pretty little arches, sandstone arches above them. And this is what we are using as the vocabulary of this building to generate our response about how we can make the openings from the prayer hall into the adjacent space, so that we can go from it being a space for 150 people to a space that might have 550 people in it. That's an example of how we're using the DNA of this building in order to make the changes. Do you remember the space we were in and we were looking towards these? So as you can see, what's happened is we've used the arches from the stair and fitted them to the inside of the barrel with small columns. But hopefully that looks like it could have been part of the original building, making it look like the building was built as a mosque.
So our hope for this space is that we make a beautiful mosque in the traditional Gothic of this country, and we make a paradise garden that's a beautiful vernacular expression of an enclosed spiritual place suited to our climate and the plant life. It's a huge opportunity.
And I think I'm taking that as our sort of lodestar in this project, that we're hoping, with him working on the landscape and me working on the building, that we'll create somewhere that is absolutely of this place, absolutely home for Muslim people in this place.
Alhamdulillah, fadlullah wasi' rahib, ya man li'abdihi idha nada sari'an yujib. Alhamdulillah, fadlullah